Well, at the heart of it, as many of the listeners may know, the word evangelical comes from ultimately the Greek word euangelion, which
Mhm.
is the Greek word for the good news. So essentially, we're good news people. But this could be said of any Christian in that regard, that we are good news people, people who've been touched by the good news of Jesus Christ. So there are some more specific elements to it. David Bebbington, the Bebbington
Yeah.
Quadrilateral is well used, and I think very helpful, high view of Scripture as being authoritative, the need for a personal conversion to Jesus, the centrality of the cross and its
Right.
atoning work, and this sense of activism that there is produced within this transformed life, a desire to make a difference in the world. I think those represent well, maybe a further refinement of evangelicalism than just saying we're good news people. But even beyond that, I I've begun to take more seriously that evangelicalism is a movement. It's a movement of
Mhm.
people. And when you think about people, they're defined not simply by their belief structures, but they're also defined by their practices. They're also defined by their language. You listen to evangelicals pray, and they sound like they pray in a certain type of way. When you listen to evangelicals give testimonies, it doesn't matter if they're Anglican or Pentecostal evangelical, Presbyterian or Baptist evangelical, their testimonies of conversion sound a certain way. There's certain types of words that get used. And this often cuts across even ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So there's not simply certain set of theological principles that would define evangelicalism. I would say there's kind of a cultural posture to evangelicalism. It's very pragmatic, what works. It's very entrepreneurial in that pragmatism, it's constant renewal movement. It's a populist movement, and I'm not using that term in any political sense. I'm saying it's a movement of the people. It's kind of this is why revivals occurred um, within evangelicalism. This is why Billy Graham was often thought of as kind of this central defining figure of evangelicalism, right? The old adage that what's an evangelicalism? Well, if you like Billy Graham, you're an evangelical. There's
Yeah.
a certain kind of populism toward that, a pragmatism. There's a sense of being a renewal movement, very pietistic. These are some of the features of evangelicalism. This last piece that I'm going to introduce is one that is somewhat conflicted, and that is evangelicals have been trying to get this issue of how to relate to culture and have vacillated on it. One of the features of evangelicalism that shows up in its pragmatism, the populism, and pietism is that it often will connect to cultural issues. I mean, evangelicals love using illustrations from pop culture in their sermons. And that kind of engagement with culture, on the one hand, can also be coupled with a deep sense of suspicion of culture, a rejection, a repudiation of culture, feeling like culture is a threat that's imposing itself upon the purity of the church. But whether it's a capitulation to culture and then just embracing it and absorbing it, or whether it's a critique and suspicion of culture, there's always the question of how we are to relate to culture. And that, I think, is also another feature of at least North American evangelicalism.